Hey guys, welcome back to my workbench. Dan here, as always, and it is the end of the month yet again. And I've been saying it, I think, at least 3 or 4 videos in a row. This year is flying by fast, and the months I just feel like are flying. Coupled with the fact that with my work schedule, it just seems like week after week, days just fly. A week doesn't even feel like a week to me anymore. That being said, I'm flying through projects right now. I've been making a really great effort to get some more rolling stock finished up. I'm still sorting out stuff in my garage, and I'm still processing cars, but I've also recently set aside a little money to buy other cars to start replacing a lot of the ones that I've sold over the year. In particular, I want to work on box cars, I want to work on auto racks and things like that, so I've made an effort to buy those specific types of cars. Also inspired by a couple recent railfan trips that have produced photographs that I personally took of really neat rail cars such as box cars, hoppers, gondolas, and tank cars that I'd like to replicate. So I've been going through and slowly finding different cars and different models as they come up on eBay, and I've actually had some pretty good success, and I haven't spent that much money, fortunately. I've put probably about $400 or $500 down investing in new rolling stock. Some of it's new, some of it's used, so I'll show you guys some of the cars that I recently got. A number of them have not arrived yet. Like I said, I've been buying these over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and the most recent batch of cars I just bought earlier in the week, and they haven't arrived yet, so I'll have to wait till next video. But I got lots of stuff to show you guys in this video of finished rolling stock from hoppers, tank cars, a box car, and an auto rack thus far. I don't have any updates on the layout so far, just because I've been taking a break out there. I got the scenery to where I wanted it to be. I've only been going out there and running a few trains. And just testing out some stuff and really deciding last minute before I do any more changes if there's anything else I want to fix. I do know a couple things I want to fix, but for this video today it's just going to be all rolling stock. So I have some hoppers to start off with, and on my trip to Pine Junction in Gary, Indiana, I saw a number of different covered hoppers that I wanted to model. So I went about collecting different prototype cars and different road names on eBay, and I also purchased some new cars too, but those haven't been done yet, so I'll save those for another video. But the first one I did was an Intermountain 4750 based on a prototype I saw. This is another Lapeyros. I know I'm completely butchering that. It's French pronunciation. It's a SIRX, so Southern Illinois Rail Car 4750. It is number 475165, and you can go on railroadpicturearchives.net and look up photos of this rail car. Matter of fact, just above me here I have a photo of the car as I took it. And there it is, the real one. Notice the lettering is all beat up, the patchwork. Alright, let's go back down here, look at the model. As we can see on the model, beat up lettering, got the patchwork. The weathering is done according to the photos, obviously. I tried to match it exactly how I saw it when I was out there and I was actually up close to the car, because as it worked out, the car was doing a slow roll by in front of me, so I had lots of time to really examine it and pay attention to the rust and everything on it. So I got a really good profile of this car to be able to replicate it. The first task with this car, being an Intermountain, was I had to obviously remove the fresh lettering. So what I used was some sandpaper, and I just used really fine sandpaper to just very lightly scuff up the lettering to give me this peeled lettering look, just like the real car has. I then used some red acrylic and I applied it in certain spots on the lettering and then streaked it down with a wet brush to give me this red faded effect. As you can see, it looks like the graphic in real life has obviously failed, and a lot of that is starting to like peel off, almost like this chalky substance now as the paint's completely dried up, and it starts to streak down. So it's a pretty cool effect. So it was the first car I've really done like this to this extent, and I think it turned out really good. Granted, there's a lot less lettering on the real prototype. In my case, I really liked the look, and I just didn't want to keep going any further, so I ended up keeping the lettering a little bit more preserved than it actually is on the prototype. That's the only discrepancy, but other than that, the weathering is all done with washes. The patchwork and everything is as exact as I could get it. On the opposite side of the car, it's covered in graffiti. The whole car has this really nasty looking graffiti on it, which I won't try to replicate. So both sides have been replicated more or less the same way. I just didn't want to model one of these really nice 4750s with all the graffiti. Now I like graffiti, but in this case the real car has some rather crappy looking graffiti, and I just didn't want to replicate that. So I chose to keep the car clean in that sense, and just really have it as this show focus on the weathering, because I love these kinds of cars when they showcase these kinds of weathering techniques, like the fading logos, the way the railings on the ends rust up. You get these rust patches around bolt seams, around the weld seams, around the car body lines and things like that, where all that rust accumulates. That's really what I wanted to focus on, not the graffiti. On the underbase, you got all the little bits of pitting. And I believe that's from vibrators or hammers. It leaves this little dent, and then it rusts, it fills in, and then you got these really cool little spots. And I do have a weathering video on a covered hopper coming up where I'll demonstrate this technique. That's just basically done with a fine tip Sharpie. It's super easy. And then you weather over it with oils, powders, and everything else. You can see I got the kick up on there. The trucks have all the nice grime and all the mud splattered all over the trucks. Lots of kick up on the ends. You got the unique patchwork. Same thing on this other end here. And then on the roof, there's a lot of rust, as you can see. But the hatches are still relatively clean. I just gave those a powder dusting. Lots of acrylic and oil work on the roof here. So even though it's a little bit more of a lightly weathered hopper compared to some I do, it still needed quite a bit of work, I guess. And it ended up coming out pretty well, and it's one of my favorite 4750s currently. These next 4750s are all going to be for my phosphate cut. Being that I live here in Ohio, I get to see a lot of these covered hoppers pretty regularly, and I get to see some pretty neat prototypes on CSX. These cars do also run on the Norfolk Southern line that runs through Fostoria, Ohio. Again, keep in mind this is all the area I'm modeling. I see a lot of these cars in Fostoria. They run on CSX, but also can run on Norfolk Southern. I've seen cuts go back and forth heading east or west. And so I wanted to model at least a few of these, and I'm working on 4 currently. These are all pretty much done. I'll save the 4th for another video just because I'm actually in the process of filming a weathering video on that, and I want to keep that a surprise. But if you guys get it, I have 4. But for now, you're only going to get to see 3 because I want to build the suspense, I guess. This first one here is an Intermountain 4750. And I actually kept this one relatively clean. You can see it's a relatively fresh repaint. It's already starting to rust a little bit. The problem is a lot of times the repaints, they don't really do a very good job refurbishing the cars. They just very quickly sandblast them and paint back over them. And a lot of times the rust just eats right through that new paint very quickly. And so a lot of these repainted 4750s, at least the ones that were done in like 2016 and 2017, with the smaller lettering. This series of car, these all about look like this. Some of them are cleaner than others, and some of them look just about as bad as even some of the old Family Lines patched cars. Anyways, with these, you have to have the placards on them, so I ended up installing some Detail Associates placards to the sides and the ends. Let me show you that. So there's placards on each end of the car, just like the real ones. Notice the kick-up spray and all that. That was all done with airbrush, powder work, and then some paint splatter tip effects there. I modeled a later phase 4750. I believe this is a Trinity 4750, or at least a mock-up of one. And how I did this was I changed the jacking pads out by making my own, and I replaced them with the late phase style jacking pads. So those were scratch made with styrene. And then I also modified the underbays, of course. There should be some more detail down there, but I keep these all pretty much just like they are. I just trim them down on the Intermountain cars. This one does not have a custom number. It's actually the stock number. I just kept it relatively clean. I did some weathering washes down the sides. I did some paint splatter, and various things like that, looking like some mud spray or something like that just got splattered up on the car. And it's all relatively fresh still, but there is that bit of rust just starting on it. Safety striping added, of course. The top is just starting to rust back up. You can see especially around the hatches where a lot of that phosphate will get spilled. It's very corrosive to metal, and it starts to get rotted up very quickly. So you can see the walkways are starting to peel up a little bit again. You get these rust patches starting to bleed back through the paint and starting to rust back over. And on the opposite side of the car, pretty much the same thing. You got some rust spots just starting, but for the most part it's relatively clean. Notice the underbays, the heavy grime wash, the kick up running up on the base there. Also notice the mud splatter. That's something I don't know why, but I started actually getting lazy with this, and I started forgetting to model that. But it's like every car you see, every one of these cars you see has this mud splatter or dust. Not just a hopper like this, every rail car in general, you see that mud and dust all over the truck. So I wanted to start reincorporating that into my weathering work. So every one of these cars you're going to see has that effect. The second hopper here is CSXT 259618, and this is another CSX car that I got, an Intermountain hopper. And with this one, what I did with it was I took all the lettering off and renumbered this one and put new data on there, some new patching rather. And all that was done with microscale and highball graphics decals. And I modified the jacking pads and the underbays again, so these are the shorter. I added the placards, all the placards to the ends and the sides. And this one has this really unique rust. You can see I modeled the rust pits and gouges and everything on the side, and then it has these crazy rust patches on the sides covering the ribs and the end portion here. So I modeled all that with acrylic paint and then followed behind with oils, and I blended that all together. You got the really nice oil washes down the side. You even got a little bit of graffiti here. On the top here, a lot of the rust is eating away at the paint at the top as well. And on the hatches, they're a lot dirtier than I normally model, but these phosphate cars get pretty filthy, so I modeled a lot of that grime and dust that's all over those carbon fiber covers. And of course the walkways themselves are very rusted up, very beat up, and the ends have the nice kick up. You got the custom number, lots of rust coming down from the top there. And on the opposite end as well, pretty much the same thing, all that kick up, which is done with airbrush, powder work, and a little bit of oil splatter. On this opposite side here, took a little bit of creative liberty with the weathering, but it's pretty much along the same guidelines as the opposite side, the prototype side. Modeled the heavy rust patching there. This one has a little bit more paint running down, with the oil paint rather, to simulate some rust that's just starting to streak down. All the fresh rust here on these sides as well. If we get a nice close-up look at there, you can see all that rust and the way it's built up all the way down the sides, nice rusty placards there. And it's all done with just earth brown and black acrylic and one color oil, burnt umber, my trusted burnt umber color. Nice grimy trucks and couplers, painted the air hoses of course, and then I got the nice mud and dust splatter all over the truck frames as well. Dirty grimy underbays with the kick up, lots of splatter, again little bits of pitting on the bays there to really enhance the overall look of this model. The next car I did is CSXT 252028, and I actually found prototype photos of this one, and I also got to see the real car about 2 weeks ago. I had a tangent hopper in my garage that I saved specifically for a CSXT prototype, so I decided to go ahead and use a tangent car for that, obviously just because I had the source model already. So what I did was I scraped some of the lettering off, I did the custom patchwork, added the safety striping, new placards. Everything else was pretty much out of the box, ready to go because it's a tangent car. These are the best representation of a Trinity 4750, really the early Trinity 4750. So these are really, really fun to weather up. And this SCL L&N cars just get all kinds of rust, pitting. Even the ones that were in grain service, they just rusted away. So you can see on the sides I did a lot of heavy washes, and then I went behind and did the oil blending to create the rust streaks, all the effects. Now you can see all that nice patchwork, the added placards. The lettering's in pretty good shape, though it's just starting to rust over, as you can see. Lots of rust there. The old data's peeling away. And then on the ends, all that nice kick-up was done. Here's the custom CSX number, placards. On the brake end of the car, you got the same thing. Very nice. And then on this side here has some more interesting rust running down the sides, and it's just all blended in very nicely with some airbrush work, oil work, just blended over a couple times to get it just right. And I'm really happy with the results. You can see there's a lot of rust streaking and pitting all the way down the side. You got a lot of rust on the top around the hatch where it normally builds up. You got a lot of rust pitting, gouging. It's all blended together with oils. Alright guys, these next two cars here are some brand new Otter Valley Railway gondolas, the 6400 scrap gondolas. These ones are ones I just recently finished. I just got the loads installed of them actually this week, matter of fact 2 days ago. And they're pretty much finished and ready to go out to the layout to throw on a trash train for testing. But both of these cars turned out super nice. I have an OFOX car, so an OFOX reporting mark car, and a DEAX car. And these are all cars that I am regularly seeing out here in Fostoria these days. These come up quite often on trash trains now. So I wanted to have at least a few of these more cleaner, more recent cars. So with all of these, The weathering is definitely detailed, but it's not as crazy as I've done to some of these so far. You can see they're pretty minimalistic in terms of graffiti, really showcasing that they're still relatively fresh, just more of a showcase on the weathering here. You'll notice the trucks are nice and grimy. There's a lot of mud and grime all over the trucks there, again, kicked up. Typically seen at these landfills, they get a lot of mud all over them. So there's a lot of like grime and grease splatter all over them. There's side scrape damage to the ribs already. And on these newer cars, the majority of the damage is usually at the top here. You see a lot of scraping and damage from impacts and scraping from the loading cranes, and also during unloading. This top cord gets very beat up very quickly, and you also see these dents and dings very quickly accumulate grime and rust. So I just tried to model a lot of this rust in its infancy here, where it's just a fresh scrape that's just starting to rust up and form here. And you can see that's all done with oil work. I just create one individual streak and I just work it in various layers across. And I also will blend it out just a little bit with some thinner to help kind of let the paint bleed out. And that does a really, really nice job replicating this kind of rust. You'll also notice these random little greasy spots. That's done with black powder. I just splatter some black powder on the sides and then streak it down in various little areas like that. Of course, I added new safety striping to these. There's a little bit of tagging on this side here, for example. On the ends, they're still, you know, not completely banged up, but you can see there's definitely some rust starting to form on the top cord there from scrapes and impacts. The kick-up spray starting to form. On this side here, got pretty much the same thing. You got a lot of damage to the top cord there in that relative area, and you got a lot of grease and smearing taking place, a lot of that garbage juice, as I like to call it. And it's just all starting to form there all over the car. Again, you got a lot of nice mud and grime kick up all over the trucks. And it just looks really, really nice. I really like these gondolas. I'm so glad that we have models of these, but I'm also still waiting for the Athearn cars to come out later this year. I think in winter is when we're expecting those, but being Athearn, it might actually be next year. We'll see, but I definitely would like to get at least a couple of the older cars so I can start modeling some of the more beat-up prototypes, like a lot of the Luex cars, some of the SIG-X, some of the CITX patch 6400s. Anyways, that's the DEX car. This next one here is the O-Fox, and this one has a little bit more graffiti on it. You can see there's the RB Bobby graffiti. He's all over these cars, and that is all done using a paint pen. I just hand painted all that on there with the pen, and I also got the classic Drugs Kill or Drugs Skill, whatever you want to call it. And then you also got the graffiti there. And just like the other car, you got all the rust. This one has quite a bit more rust starting to form all around that top cord. Just at the top of those panels there, you can see it's just starting to form up. And then if we look at the ends there as well, got a little bit of rust starting to form, some graffiti on this end as well. All that nice kick up with the splatter. Very cool. And then on this side, a little bit more minimalistic in terms of graffiti. There's not as much graffiti on this side. Really just moreover showcasing the, not the graffiti, excuse me, but the weathering itself. And you can see, if we look at the sides, again, there's a lot of that rust damage. You can see it's all over. Some of the lettering starting to get peeled off a little bit. The safety striping is getting a little beat up. You got a lot of side scrapes on the sides. It's very important when you model these. A lot of these cars get this side scrape, this impact damage. But you can see all that fresh rust, the way it's just starting to form there. It's very prototypical. I think it's scaled down really nicely. It's all fresh, it's just starting to streak a little bit, but it just looks so cool. And the loads in particular on these cars are awesome. That's my newest method of making the C&D loads for these things. I just use a foam core, install it inside the car, and then I pretty much have the whole thing wrapped in tool fabric. So it's a combination of different materials to actually create these realistic, relatively convincing C&D loads. And both these cars have them, obviously. Now, someone had asked me about these cars before if all these cars have netting, and the answer is no. Not all these cars have netting. Sometimes you have to pay attention to the reporting marks on the car. Some shippers always wrap these loads with the netting, and other shippers don't. It just depends on the grade of the C&D, how fine it is. There's a number of cars that don't have netting, but these newer cars, and these shippers in particular, they use netting on them. So I modeled a couple C&D loads here that do have the netting. But all the other 6400s, other than the Cardella cars that I've modeled, all have open loads where they don't have any kind of covering on them. So anyways, that's the two trash cars. Those are all ready to go out into service. I need to also get some pictures of these so I can post them around, but they're really, really nice cars. Moving on to some LPG tank cars. I haven't modeled these in quite a while, but I've been hoarding, or I guess I can't really say hoarding, but rather collecting some of the newer Athearn releases as they come out. They've offered a lot of nice modern paint schemes on these LP cars, which is really nice for modern modelers like, you know, me in this case, because these are a lot of cars that I see regularly here in Ohio. So it's nice to be able to have models of them and then regularly be able to see prototypes to kind of get inspired in terms of recognizing the weathering patterns, what kind of patchwork, what kind of graffiti they get. So that was kind of the case that helped me out with this PLMX one, which is the first one I'm going to show you guys. This car here was nice and glossy out of the package. What I did was I faded this down quite a bit with a couple shades of dull coat, a couple coats rather. I then applied the underbody grime and kick-up from the wheels, weathered up the wheels and trucks and couplers. You can see there's a lot of mud caked up on the trucks, same with the kick-up on the ends. There's those. On the top area there, that walkway area gets pretty dirty, so you can see I modeled a lot of grime and road dust collecting around that hatch. On the fitting there, on the top of the railings there a little bit, it's just kind of grimy. And then you got a lot of that fresh grime just starting to kind of streak down the side of the car. Matter of fact, let me get this dust off there so you can see it a little bit better. Sorry about that. Anyways, we get in up close here, you can see that rust that's just starting to form. I added the safety striping, of course, and the interesting part on this car is the area where they redid some of the data. Being a repatched car, this originally had some different data, and it was also loaded for butadiene, I believe, if I've pronounced that right, probably not. But this car was later converted for LP service, and I just modeled some of the black patching with trim film, and then the new LPG stencils are from Smokebox Graphics. And you can see I just added those. I just tried to do some really unique patching, and then I tried to weather the patching in a little bit with some streaking to make it look like it's a little bit aged in, instead of just looking absolutely, you know, brand spanking new like they just did it yesterday. I just tried to make it look kind of rough and crappy like they did it in a hurry, and then they just applied the vinyl decals on the side there. Correctly labeled for 1075, the LP gas. Very nice detail on these Genesis tanks. These are just so much fun to weather. They're really, honestly, a nice break, especially after you've done a bunch of gondolas, a bunch of box cars, stuff like that. These can really break things up, break some of that monotony up, because it's just a different challenge to try to weather a rounded, large car like this, I guess you could say. It's just a lot of fun, I guess that was what I'm trying to convey to you guys. If I look at the trucks again, up close, you can see that mud. It's all over the bottom of the truck frame there. Notice that nice fading. Again, you got that rust streaking coming down the side of the car. And then on this side, you got a slight variation in the patchwork. You'll notice that they did the stenciling slightly different on this side, which I think is pretty cool. There's got all these different little areas where they just repaired, patched over old data, old lettering, old stencils, and then they relabeled it. You can see it's different on both sides. I like to model those effects because no two sides are usually alike on these kinds of cars, so that's what I was trying to kind of go for here. So you can see the different patching and then the new non-odorized LPG stencils there. So that's a really nice touch on this car. I'll move this one out of the way and let's go ahead and look at this one here. And this car is a little bit cleaner. Honestly, that one, the PLMX I just showed you, is the dirtiest out of all of these. The others I'm going to show you are brand new, the way I modeled them. This one was a brand new, fresh, glossy car. I tried to model this one as it appears currently with slightly faded paint. A lot of that bright, glossy finish is faded off just a little bit, and it's starting to fade. And here you can see it's again an LP car. It's got the large GBRX lettering for Greenbrier. I just modeled the kick-up on the underbody. If I can pull this in here. There. Got all that mud splatter, all the grime and dirt and everything on the trucks. Looks really nice. There's that nice fading. Added the safety striping. And on the ends, there's that kick up. Same thing on this end. And if we switch sides here, we can look at the light rust that's just starting to come down the walkway supports, or rather from the walkway supports. It's also starting to form around the hatch again there, that high traffic area. It's just starting to collect a little bit of that dust and grime, and it's just starting to streak its way down. It's not quite rust level here, it's just a little bit of dirt and grime that just collects in these areas and it starts to streak down the car body. But it's a nice modern car and it's ready to go into service on the layout. And who doesn't love a fresh rail car? Or at least I do. I modeled two brand new LPG cars, and these are again Athearn releases here. And they're actually factory modeled here with the high gloss finish, which I think is really cool. So handling these cars was definitely a challenge because I had to work very carefully around this glossy paint. And even with precautions like wearing gloves and things like that, there's still a number of smears and things like that on the car body that I can't really take off, which is very irritating. But I tried to preserve the factory fresh glossy finish as much as I could here. And I just tried to model new cars is what I was going for. So here's a fresh GBRX car here. You can see it's got new safety striping added. There's barely any kick up on the underbody. There's just some grime and rust on the trucks, on the couplers. But other than that, factory fresh. New LPG stenciling. I did add the little vinyl cover here to the car. That's something you see a lot on these LP cars. And if we turn it around here, it's pretty much the same on the opposite side. Again, I'm having to be pretty careful handling these. I'm only picking these up by the stirrups because I don't want to get fingerprints on the sides here. I'm just watching for dust. Sorry about that, guys. Anyways, on this opposite side here, you can see again, really nice high gloss finish. You got the nice weathering on the trucks. All the stenciling is there. So it's a really nice out-of-the-box factory fresh car. All I had to do here again was just weather the trucks and wheels, add the safety striping, and that was pretty much it. I didn't do any kind of extra finishing to the sides other than just some basic cleanup out of the box, but that was pretty much it. This next car, done pretty much the same way. This one is even newer. This one is not even assigned to service yet. Here you can see I just added the safety striping to it. This is a CBTX car, and then I just did a light grime on the trucks using just powders and a little bit of mud. You can see this one still has the bright blue bearings on it. It's very clean though, a nice high gloss finish. It's got the stencil covers there. And then if we turn around to the opposite side, pretty much the same thing. Like I said, only a couple weeks out of the factory. It's pretty much the way I'm modeling it being shipped for service. So it's unloaded, nice and clean, ready for service, and it just looks really, really cool. I really am glad Athearn modeled these kinds of cars. It's just annoying with the factory gloss finish because you really got to be careful around it. It makes actually handling these cars a bit of a challenge, I'll say that. Alright guys, wrapping up this video for the month, I have some flat cars I want to show you, and these are again some cars I've never really done before up until now. These are some Scale Trains Bulkhead flat cars, and a number of you guys will be familiar with these because these came out a couple years ago now. They've been on the market. I think they originally came out in like 2019, 2018 maybe, something like that. I have a few of these cars from the original run. Actually only one, and then I think the other two are from the second run that they did. And I am thinking about getting some more just because I would like to make a small fleet of pipe cars, being that I see these kinds of cars pretty regularly in pipe service. This one here, however, is an unloaded version. I wanted at least a couple idler cars to put into a manifest. And with this one here, out of the box, it's got some really unique patching. Let's go ahead and take a look at the detail on this car. So, Scale Trains does a really good job of prototypically numbering and patching these cars. They have a number of these cars really in their primed for grime series, if you will, where they already have a lot of that patching taken care of for you. A lot of them have been repatched for the new TTX logo, for example. I can't tell if this is going out of focus. I apologize, guys. Let me double see if this works a little bit better. That's slightly better. The lighting's not helping here either. Anyways, a lot of these cars come pre-patched for you. All I had to do was just weather these things. Mainly on the underbody here, there's a lot of grime, there's a lot of dirt and debris and things like that gets sprayed up on this beam on the floorboards underneath here. So I weathered all this with an airbrush and then a lot of powder work. The trucks are nicely weathered with acrylics, black and brown acrylic mix, bit of powder work, mud splatter of course, and that takes care of these wheels really nicely. On the car body itself, you got an acrylic and oil wash to get the right tinting. I use a little bit of airbrush if it's a really dirty car like the ones I'll show you in a second. And then I use some powder work. I do a lot of the fine rust streaking, especially around the bulkhead ends. You get a lot of rust picking up on this little pocket and it starts to streak down here. I added all the safety striping. You got a lot of rust pitting and gouging, everything like that. You can see the patchwork is relatively fresh, but it's already starting to rust back over. As we work down the side of the car, we get to the number end here, and you can see the numbers are nicely beat up, pretty faded. And the other end of the bulkhead here has got some nice running rust coming down from the corners there. The detail on these is just really nice too, I gotta say. I really like the end bulkhead detailing. It is a bit of a trick to weather this bulkhead, I will say that, because you got to get in there and try to hit each individual angle, and then you're trying to do all this rust technique. It's a little bit of work, but it's worth it if you take the time to do it right. Anyways, on the top of the bulkhead, you can see there's a lot of scrape and impact damage. There's a nice bit of grime built up on the top there. I thought that was really cool. Lots of grime worked into the interior of the bulkhead and the ribbing and the bracing on the wood plates. You got the safety striping, the little safety blocks added to the ends. All this detail is stock from the factory. It's very nice. There's a lot of pitting, a lot of gouging. That's all done with oil work, just lightly rendered onto the surface. On the other bulkhead end there, it's pretty much the same thing. You can see all those nice scrapes. Let me get in kind of close here. You guys can see that? These little gouges. That's just done in kind of a random manner with a very frayed out brush dipped in fresh oil. Non-diluted, you just scrape it across the bulkhead and it gives it this really nice effect. Matter of fact, I'll show this technique in an upcoming weathering video on one of these bulkheads, so you guys can stay tuned for that. But you can see there's a lot of that rust pitting. On this side here, you got a little bit of graffiti, but I really didn't want to put graffiti on any of these for the most part. I wanted to really just have them as centerpieces. Really, the main focus here is on this really unique weathering. Flat cars are really cool the way they weather, and you can see this one has a lot of fine dot technique, a lot of rust streaking down the side. Again, it's got some really unique patching, and as we go down the car body here, you can see again the faded lettering on the TTPX logos there, or rather the stenciling. The patchwork has been nicely weathered in, modeled in to look relatively fresh, but it's just starting to weather back over, and some of that rust is starting to peel back through that fresh paint. And here you can see the little jack pads are starting to rust up again, and the bulkhead's got all kinds of nice little bits of damage. On the actual deck itself, these are nice because they're wood decking, and there's about 1,000 ways you can do this. In this case, with this deck, what I did was I weathered all the individual little supporting beams first with oils and acrylics. Then I went back in and I had hand weathered each individual deck panel with some dry brushing, some dry wash effects to get the nice weathered wood grain look. And I just did a couple washes until I was satisfied with the color. You can see some boards are lighter than others. Now I'm not going in and individually painting each board. I'm not a madman. But on the bulkhead I did try to replicate some of that at least, with one of the replaced boards, for example, and then the rest being very dirty. Here you can see there's also some load shift impact damage to these boards where something got beat up, and that's just done with a blowtorch. And again, I'll demonstrate this technique in a future video. It's very easy to do. You just heat up a dental pick and then just stick it into the plastic, being that this is not wood material on the end, this is just plastic. So you just melt that in and then weather it in, and it looks really nice. It gives you this really realistic effect. Again, there's about 1,000 ways to weather these the wood on one of these bulkheads. Sometimes you get this really nice gray dried out wood. Sometimes you have this dark rotted wood. It really depends on like the climate and the region that these cars are operating in. A lot of times in the wetter climates you see a lot more of this dark rotted wood. So this is something you see a lot more of the time out here in my part of the US, kind of up east here. You see a lot more of these rotted wood deck plates and supports and things like that on these kinds of cars. Out west you got a lot more of the dried out, grayed out wood, like what's kind of being replicated here on the deck with this gray wood. Some cars are all gray wood, but in this case with the ones I was modeling, I wanted to have mostly the rotted dark wood grain finish here because that's mostly what I see here in my part of the US, like I said. Alright, these last two cars are the really nice bulkheads. These are the ones that actually have a proper pipe load, and I mentioned earlier when I first started showing these cars that I wanted to model a few that have pipe loads, and so I went ahead and did two relatively heavily weathered cars fitted with the loads. These are custom loads from eBay. These are actually pop up pretty regularly. I've bought quite a few of these loads at this point, and I plan on installing a few more as I get some new cars in. But this one here is just a lot more weathered than the first. This has a lot more grime, a lot more rust dot work on the bulkhead. You got to pay attention to the prototypes. Some of these cars were repainted at different points. Others are original paint and they're just starting to rot. Like this one has the original paint on it and it's just starting to peel really bad. It's starting to rust at the ends of the bulkheads there, for example. It's starting to rot down the end of the car there as well, along the edge there. You can see there's a lot of fine rust streaking, a lot of fine grime. This one has the repatched TTX again, as that's been upgraded. The trucks are nicely done. The underbody is weathered the same as the first car. and all the deck pieces have been nicely weathered in. If we take a look at this, there's that variation with some of the more rotted wood, more strips of relatively replaced boards. You got some slight variation here with discoloration. So I did try to make an effort at least trying to model some individual boards, but again, there's much better ways you can weather these bulkheads, I'll tell you that. Certain modelers like Craig Cole, for example, he'll take and model each individual board, weather it, tear pieces off of it, and actually like dent the boards in, and it's incredible. Cars like this, you know, you can take them as far as you want. And again, some of these cars, there is some insane weathering on these boards. And you can have a lot of fun doing this kind of technique. But being that I was trying to put in some detail, but also not go insanely crazy with the detail to a point where it was just ridiculous, you know, because I was trying to make a fleet of these relatively quick. I try to just do a lot of paint techniques, a lot of sanding work and things like that to weather in the boards and paint them, and it still turned out pretty good. I think you can see that nice combination of the grayed out wood, dried wood, some darker reddish wood, and then the rotted dark wood here at the top. Looking at the pipe load itself, I didn't have to do anything to this. The modeler that makes these adds all of his own banding, the wood strips, and everything. So it's a nice pre-packaged load that you can just fit onto these cars. The only thing I had to do was add the metal bands supporting it, running to the tie-down points. And I also added these little boards underneath, and I paint matched them to the actual wood that he used for these supports. So you can see I matched the color and then installed those onto the deck of the car. Another little detail I wanted to point out here with these pipe loads is I stencil on some of the little bits of writing, measurements, weights, for example, little stuff like that. You kind of see this often on pipe loads and other metal loads, steel coils, for example, and this is something a lot of people don't model. But little bits of writing like this really enhance the detail of even a pre-made pipe load like this. It makes it look like these are individually inspected, and it's a really neat effect. I really like that detail. You see it on all of these loads. So I just did that with a fine tip Jelly Roll ink white pen, and it just did an excellent job with that. And that is on both sides of the car. If we flip this around, it is also on this opposite end as well. So I thought that was a cool little detail. Getting back into the other end of the other end of the car. It's pretty much weathered the same way. A lot of dark rust forming around the edge of that bulkhead, starting to pit and peel. And then if we look at the side of the car here, you can see all that nice rust forming along the rust. We have individual rust lines coming down from each one of these little supports too. That's something you see on the center beam cars, these kinds of flat cars, the bulkheads, the smaller bulkheads. They all have individual little rust lines, little pits and things like that. So there are all kinds of little details you can add to these to make them look really, really nice. And again, if we look at the trucks there, they're nicely weathered in. They got all the mud splatter and grime on them, of course, and that all looks really good. And then there's this end of the bulkhead with all that nice rust pitting. That's all done with acrylic paint and oil techniques. Also on the ends, there's a little bit more of that gouging and scraping. That's all, again, done with that random brush technique using a very frayed out brush. Matter of fact, in this case, this kind of brush, where it's very frayed out and bent up. You stick this in some fresh oil, and it does a very good job replicating these little streaks. If we look at the bulkhead here, again, there's a lot of grime, a lot of rust pitting on the end bulkheads as well. There you can see it. It's a little heavier on this end. Alright guys, and the third and final car is the Magnum Opus. This is the one I spent a lot of time weathering and detailing, and I patched this car. I did a lot of extra detail work in terms of the weathering, and this car is the one I actually filmed for the upcoming weathering video that I'm in the process of doing the final narrations for, and I've pretty much edited it together, so it's ready to go. It just needs to get some final inspection, voiceover, dubbed over, and all that. It ended up coming out really good. I actually filmed this one first. It took me about a month to do. That's why it took so long. I've been filming this thing quite a bit and trying to go into as much detail as possible, because again with these bulkheads, I mean, there's so much to them. You think that a flat car would be simpler, but oh no, this is actually very, very hard. Flat cars provide a really interesting set of challenges. You know, it's not like weathering a hopper or a tank car. I mean, tank cars can be challenging too, but honestly, boxcars and hoppers, even if they're rust buckets, they're a lot of times a lot more easier to weather. These are a little bit more tedious and a little bit more tricky because the work surfaces that you have are much smaller. So you're trying to compact a lot of technique into a very small area, and you're trying not to overdo it, but you also want to have, especially with a rust bucket like this, a lot of weathering on there. So you're trying to kind of balance it out. You're trying to find the right technique. So I definitely struggled a little bit as I got going with this, and I had to just find the right amount of technique to get into it and to model it exactly how I wanted. But once I got going, I ended up finding it was quite a pleasure. Now, honestly, these are some of my favorite cars to weather, being that I've been able to get some practice doing a couple. So I definitely want to make a few more of these. But getting into the weathering of the car, you can see it obviously does have another pipe load installed already. But in terms of weathering, this is the rustiest out of all of them. You can see the bulkhead's very beat up. There's a lot of fresh rust running down the length of the car. You can see there's a lot of rust rot. New patches made out for the safety striping, which are already starting to rust up. There's the number. You can see all those little black individual patch areas, and they got the new patch with the TTX logo there. Lots of rust around the jacking pads coming down from that bulkhead. It's just starting to rust, and it's a real mess. The underbody is rotted to hell. Lots of mud splatter under there. Lots of mud splatter on the trucks as well, too. On the ends, if we take a look at these, very, very dirty. And these took quite a bit of work to get in there and paint all that, and then paint the boards individually, do all that heavy kick up, mud splatter and everything like that. It took a long time, and it was a lot of extra work because I had a camera between my legs trying to film all that the whole time. So if we actually look at the other end here, pretty much the same. There's a little bit of patching, a lot of chalky rust, a lot of grimy running rust, and then a lot of scrapes into the paint where something's impacted and scraped across that, leaving a path of like the underlying paint away from the grime. You see that a lot in these kinds of cars, on intermodal cars too in particular. The coupler and all that's nicely weathered up, of course. If we actually look at the bulkheads, it's going to be hard because this has a pipe load, but you can see I kind of tried to model these by going in there and modeling those impacts to the base of the bulkhead where load shifts and impacts have a tendency to damage the wood. But you can see most of the wood is painted on this car except for these two boards on this end, which have been replaced. And you can see I tried to do a really heavy wash weathering technique, a lot of oil work and dry brushing to weather the boards. The baseboards on this are nicely rotted out, though. You can see it's a nice variation of darker and lighter rotted wood. Obviously, it's hard to see with the load being here, and I'm doing my best, so bear with me. If you look at the other end, you might be able to see the weathering on the other end a little bit better. There's a lot of load impact on this end. Like I said, I really just went to town doing that, trying to model that. You can see there's a lot of that heavy damage, and that's super easy to do. I know it looks really tedious and really hard to do, but it's actually the easiest part of weathering this car, and honestly the most fun. There you can see the boards are still nicely painted. They're just really beat up. They're starting to get shagged up quite a bit, I will say. The pipe load's nicely installed. It's installed the same way as the others. I install my new boards, center it on the car, and then band it down with black tape to get that. And then again on this side, let's see, actually we need to switch to this side. This is the opposite side we didn't see, and you can see there's a slight variation in the patchwork again, but again lots and lots of rust. Matter of fact, there's a lot more rust streaking on this side. It's working all its way down the side of the car. You can see they made a little arrow marking the little retainer valve. That's something you see. It's not modeled often. I just took a little Jelly Roll ink pen, same one I used to do the writing on the pipes, to do the little arrow pointing to the retainer valve. And then you can see the patching made out for the safety striping. Goes all the way down to the other end where the rust and all that is. Lots of mud on the bulkhead or on the trucks, on the underframe there. So there's a lot of detail in all these cars. Also at the top you can see that's just very, very heavily rusted. So this is the most heavily rusted car that I've done thus far. I don't plan on doing any more like severe rust buckets like this, but this particular class of car, they definitely get very rusty, I will say. So it's just modeling these a prototype to prototype basis. Some of the cars I've tried to model with photos and they just don't look good. So I've kind of freelance some of the weathering a little bit, like in this car, for example. But I'm still trying to keep some of those guidelines like what you see on the real prototypes, where a lot of these are in pretty rough shape, you know, because a lot of these cars are getting pretty old in their years now, and they all are pretty beat up, especially with the nature of what they're hauling, like these pipe loads, metal plates, and other various objects. A lot of times you see that shifting, so the decks get beat up, the bulkheads get beat up, and I've tried to replicate all those techniques here. Coming up next, I have some locomotives I want to do. I want to do an NREX leaser with that. I got an AC 4400 up here we're going to work on. Rail box is waiting. I just got a boxcar I'm going to patch, some more hoppers. I got another OVR gun I got to work on, and then I have these LPs. This one on top is reserved for a how-to video. I'll be weathering this guy for another video. I just got so many videos I got to film at this point. I have some hoppers, the new Prairie Shadows hoppers I got to do. These two NLKLs came in the other day, so I'm going to be working on these. But yeah, I got all kinds of cars I want to do. You can see there's this one's patched Rio Grande. I'm going to be doing an MWCX car with this one. And I got a bunch of other hoppers I'm going to finish. I'm going to really try to make an effort to do quite a few new how-tos and really showcase a lot of my new techniques. So these are all cars you guys can keep an eye out on because most of these I will be filming for how-tos. Alright guys, so that's going to pretty much wrap up this video for now. We'll see you in another month with another update. In the meantime, I do have some more project videos I'm about to upload. The first one I'm going to be showing will be the Bulkhead, but I'm in the process of filming quite a few other videos, including some locomotives, other different cars, some hoppers for example. So you guys can stay tuned for all that. I want to just try to crank out as many new weathering videos as I can to really get me caught up because I've been really trying to make a proper focus on filming as much as I can as I weather stuff. I also have an update coming up on this hopper here. I have a video of that, so you guys can stay tuned for that. I have some other neat little project videos coming up as well. So again, subscribe here on YouTube so you don't miss anything, guys, seriously. And I also want to give a big thank you to you guys. We're at 11,993 subscribers, so we're right around the corner from hitting 12,000 subs, and I cannot believe it. I am just absolutely thrilled. I can't believe I've come this far on YouTube. I can't thank you guys enough. It's been so much fun learning the system here on YouTube, getting used to making these videos. It's a lot of fun. It's sometimes time consuming. It does take time to weather these cars and also film them, edit them. You know, it's been a learning experience for me, but I do have fun doing this. You know, this hobby is a passion for me, and it's also fun being able to interact with all of you guys. I made a lot of great friends from YouTube, meeting them, and being able to share a lot of my techniques here has been such a great avenue for me in life. You know, I do really like being able to share and help a lot of you younger guys out, and even a lot of the older guys too. You know, a lot of these people are going back and wanting to learn some of these techniques, and I'm more than happy to share this stuff. So I will do everything in my power to keep this up and keep giving you guys this great content. But again, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, guys. Seriously. Alright, that's enough jibber jabber. I will see you in the next video, guys. Thank you so much. Take it easy.